The auctioneer's voice carried across the Hardin Creek Courthouse Square, the way a voice carries when a man has been paid to make sure it does. It was a Thursday morning in October of 1886, and the crowd was the size a crowd gets when people have come for something they know they should not want to watch, but cannot bring themselves to miss. Hannah Birch stood at the top of the courthouse steps with her 6 daughters arranged behind her in descending order of height, which was the arrangement they had fallen into naturally, the way animals arrange themselves at a fence. She was not looking at the crowd. She was looking at a fixed point somewhere above the livery stable on the far side of the square, and her face held an expression that her second eldest daughter, Clara, 14 years old, would describe 30 years later as the face of a woman doing arithmetic. The auctioneer called for opening bids on the Birch property, 60 acres east of town, a farmhouse, a barn, and 1 season's worth of debt. Nobody moved. If you have ever watched someone stand up straight when everything is trying to push them down, stay with me. Please subscribe to this channel right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Every single name matters. Now come back to that courthouse square, because a man in the back of that crowd is about to do something that will cost him everything he has, and in doing it, give himself the only thing he was ever missing. Her name was Hannah Louise Birch, née Caldwell, and she had been a widow for 7 months and 11 days. Her husband, Edmund Birch, had been a farmer of moderate success and immoderate optimism, a combination that had served them reasonably well for 16 years and had finally come apart in the spring when Edmund had borrowed against the following year's crop to purchase a second-hand threshing machine that the seller had described as reliable, and that had seized permanently on. Its 3rd day of operation, Edmund had died of a heart seizure in June, 3 weeks after the machine failed, on a hot afternoon in the lower field, with his boots on and a list of things to do still folded in his breast pocket. He had left Hannah 6 daughters. Lily was 16. Clara was 14. June was 11. The twins, May and Ruth, were 8. The youngest, Bess, had turned 5 in August and did not fully understand what was happening on the courthouse steps, except that her mother's hand was very tight around hers, and that tightness was its own form of information. Hannah was 38 years old. She was a large woman, broad through the shoulders and the hips, with dark hair going gray at the temple and hands that were calloused from every variety of work a farm demanded of the person willing to do it. She had worked that land alongside Edmund for 16 years. She had planted it, harvested it, nursed it through 2 dry summers and 1 flood year, kept its books in a ledger she still had, and raised 6 daughters on it, without losing a single one to illness or accident, which was not something every woman in Wyoming Territory in 1886 could say. None of that was relevant to the bank. The bank's position was that the note was due and the note was unpaid, and the property would be sold to satisfy it. The bank's representative, a man named Foote with a careful suit and a manner of looking past people rather than at them, had delivered this information to Hannah in her own kitchen 6 weeks ago, with the air of a man performing a service he considered self-evidently correct. She had tried every avenue she knew. Letters to Edmund's brother in Missouri. No answer. The lawyer in Cheyenne who had drafted Edmund's will, expensive and unavailing. A petition to the county judge that the sale price would exceed the debt and the remainder should revert to her, acknowledged, filed, and not acted upon in time. The auctioneer's name was Pell. He had a voice like a cattle bell and a practiced way of making humiliation feel procedural. He had announced the terms twice. He had called for opening bids. Nobody moved. This was the part of the morning that Hannah had not let herself imagine in advance, because imagining it had threatened to undo her, and she could not afford to be undone. The silence was not indifference. The crowd knew her. Half of them had bought eggs from her daughters on Saturday mornings, had taken her jam at the Harvest Social, had sat next to Edmund Birch in the Hardin Creek Church for years. The silence was the sound of a town watching something it knew was wrong and did not know how to stop. She kept her eyes on the fixed point above the livery stable. Behind her, Bess pressed against the backs of her legs. The auctioneer called the bid a second time. Then a voice from the back of the crowd said, $300. His name was Cole Reardon, and he was 31 years old, and he had exactly $312 to his name, which was every cent he had saved in 9 years of working cattle on other men's ranches. He had arrived in Hardin Creek 8 months ago to take a foreman's position on the Aldgate spread, and had been, by all accounts, a man who kept to himself, not unfriendly, not broken, simply private in the way of men who have spent so long in their own company that they have arrived at a comfortable arrangement with themselves and see no particular reason to disturb it. He had not known Hannah Birch before that Thursday morning. He had seen her twice. Once at the general store in September when she was buying flour in a quantity that said she was feeding a large household and budgeting hard to do it. And once at the edge of the auction crowd itself, from 40 feet away, before the proceedings began. He had watched her walk to those courthouse steps and arrange her daughters and look out over the crowd at something that was not there. And he had understood in a way that required no explanation that he was watching a woman carrying more weight than any one person should carry, and carrying it without giving the watching crowd the satisfaction of seeing her bend. He had bid the $300 before he had fully decided to. The crowd turned. He was standing at the back with his hat in his hand and his jaw set, and the look of a man who had done a thing and was prepared to stand behind it regardless of where it led. Pell, the auctioneer, looked at him over the heads of the crowd. "Do I hear 350? Nobody spoke. 300 going once, Pell said. 300 going twice. He looked at Foote, the bank's man, who was studying something in his ledger with great attention. Sold. Hannah Birch turned for the first time and looked at the back of the crowd. Cole Reardon looked back at her. He had $12 remaining, and no plan whatsoever. He came to the house the following morning with his hat in his hand again, which was where it seemed to spend most of its time, and Hannah met him at the door in her work apron because it was 7 in the morning and she had bread in the oven and 6 children to feed and could not stop for ceremony. She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the door wider and let him in. The kitchen was warm and loud and full. Lily was at the table with the twins, helping May with her letters. Clara was washing the breakfast dishes with the focused efficiency of a girl who had been doing it since she was 9. June sat on the floor near the stove, mending a hem with a needle that was slightly too large for the work, which meant she was doing it by determination rather than by technique. Bess was on the bench by the window with a rag doll that had seen considerable use. Cole Reardon stood in the doorway of that kitchen and absorbed it all with the expression of a man who had not been inside a house that felt like a home in a considerable number of years. "Sit down," Hannah said, because there was no useful way to have the conversation he had clearly come to have while standing in a doorway. She poured him coffee and put it in front of him and went back to the stove. He said, "I should tell you what I have." "Tell me," she said. $12, he said. "A horse, my saddle and tack. What's in my saddlebag, which is not much. The foreman position at Aldgate, which pays $42 a month." He paused. "The deed is in your name. I had Footy draw it that way yesterday. You own the property. I have no claim to it." Hannah set the bread paddle down and turned and looked at him fully for the first time since the courthouse steps. She was a direct woman by nature, and had become more so by necessity and she looked at him the way she looked at everything she was trying to understand, without the social pretense of looking at something slightly beside the point. "Why?" she said. He turned his hat in his hands. He was quiet for 4 seconds, which she later counted because it seemed like a long time. "I watched you stand on those steps," he said finally, "and I thought about a woman who planted and worked 60 acres and raised 6 children and ran the books on a farm for 16 years, and I thought about the bank selling it under her for a debt a broken machine made. And I could stop it. So I did." Bess had gotten down from the window bench without anyone noticing and was now standing beside Cole Reardon's elbow, examining him at close range. "Are you going to live here?" she said. "Bess," Hannah said. "It's a fair question," Cole said. He looked at Bess. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's up to your mother." Bess considered this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old conducting an assessment. Then she climbed up onto the bench beside him, which was a declaration. Clara, at the sink, was watching all of this with the particular attention of a 14-year-old girl who has decided she will reserve judgment and means it. He did not move in. He came every morning at 6 and stayed until after supper, and he worked. Whatever wanted doing on the 60 acres, he did it, without asking what he should do next and without requiring direction, because he was a man who had spent 9 years reading land and cattle and weather, and he could read a farm's needs the same way. He repaired the south fence before the first frost. He winterized the barn. He replaced the rotted boards on the well cover that Hannah had been working around since August, which she had not mentioned to him, and which he simply found and fixed. He ate supper at their table every evening and said very little and listened to a great deal. The daughters were a study in strategy. Bess had admitted him on the first day and treated his presence as settled. The twins took 11 days, May 1st, then Ruth 3 days later, converted by the fact that he had quietly repaired the broken leg on their particular chair without being asked, and without saying so, the way he had done it while they were in school, and simply set it back in place. June watched him for 3 weeks before she brought him a problem, which was a difficult arithmetic question she had been given at school, and which she had been unable to work out. He looked at it for a moment and worked it out aloud, showing each step. And June listened, and then said, "Can you show me that part again?" And he did, and she said, "Oh," in the tone of a person who had genuinely understood something, and after that, she brought him the difficult ones first. Lily, 16 and her mother's eldest, was the last. She was a girl who had watched her mother carry everything alone for 7 months and had tried to help carry it herself in the ways available to a 16-year-old, which were real ways, but insufficient, and she was protective in the manner of someone who had assessed the cost of loss and decided they could not afford another. She watched Cole Reardon for a full 5 weeks. She watched him be consistent. She watched him be the same man on a cold Tuesday as on a warm Saturday. She watched him talk to her mother without performing anything, without the particular false warmth that men sometimes applied to situations they were hoping to get something out of. On the 37th day, she asked him to show her how to read the quality of a steer from a distance, which was a thing she had decided she wanted to know, and which her father had never had occasion to teach her. He showed her without comment on the fact of being asked, which was what she had been waiting to see, whether he would treat the question as ordinary or as remarkable, and ordinary was the correct answer. The smell that reached the back of the house every evening at 6 o'clock was Hannah's doing. She baked every morning while the household woke around her. Bread first, because bread was the foundation of everything. Dense sourdough loaves that she had been making since before Lily was born from a culture she kept in a crock on the high shelf. Then biscuits for the midday meal. or corn cakes when the flour was low. She had been baking like this her entire adult life, and she was not sentimental about it. It was work. Like all the other work, but the smell of it was the smell of the house being alive, and she knew it, and she did not stop. Cole Reardon had grown up in a house where the kitchen was cold in the mornings, and the meals were whatever was fastest. The smell of bread baking at 6 in the morning was not something he had known was missing. He knew it now. He began leaving the bread crock lid off at night so the starter could breathe, which was something Hannah had not asked him to do, and which told her he had been paying attention. Foutte came back on a Wednesday in December, 41 days after the auction. He came with a document and the expression of a man who had been directed to perform a procedure and was performing it. The document alleged a defect in the auction process. Specifically, that the bid had been placed by a party not registered as a legitimate bidder under the terms of the original debt instrument, and that the sale was therefore void. The property, Foutte explained, would need to be relisted. Hannah read the document twice, standing at the kitchen door. Then she said, "Come back tomorrow morning." She sent Lily to fetch Cole from the Aldgate spread that same afternoon. He read the document at the kitchen table, while Hannah stood at the stove and did not look at him, because she was thinking and looking at him while she thought would have interrupted both activities. He set it down. "Who owns the original debt instrument?" "The Hardin Creek Savings and Trust," she said. "Foote represents them." "And who owns the Hardin Creek Savings and Trust?" he said, "since Aldgate sold his stake in it last spring." Hannah turned from the stove. "I didn't know that." "Harmon Price," Cole said. "He said the name the way you name a thing you have known the nature of for a long time. He's been buying up distressed land east of town for 3 years. 4 properties since '83. All auction sales. All relisted after the first bid on some paperwork defect." She sat down at the table across from him, because this was information that required a chair. "The defect he's citing," Cole said. "Let me see the bidder registration terms in the original instrument." She found them in Edmund's papers, which she had kept in a tin box in the bedroom in the order Edmund had kept them, which was orderly, because Edmund had been orderly about papers even when he was not orderly about everything else. Cole read the relevant section twice. Then he looked up. "The instrument requires a registered bidder," he said. "It does not define what registration consists of. Pell the auctioneer accepted my bid. Pell is the instrument's designated auction officer. His acceptance is the registration." He set the paper down. "This defect doesn't exist. Price is betting that you don't know that and can't afford a lawyer long enough to find it out." Hannah looked at him. "I need a copy of that section," he said, "and I need to be in front of the county judge before Foutte files the relisting notice, which will be Monday at the earliest given that tomorrow is Thursday." They rode into Copper Falls the next morning, Hannah and Cole and Lily, because Lily had asked to come, and Hannah had seen no reason to refuse her. The judge's office was in the county courthouse on the far end of Main Street, and they walked through the Copper Falls Thursday market to get there, which meant walking past the stalls and the early shoppers, and the particular current of attention that runs through any public space when something worth watching is passing through it. Hannah Birch was not a small woman, and she had never been one, and the look that followed her through Copper Falls that morning was the look of a town that had heard about the auction and was now doing the arithmetic on the woman walking toward the courthouse with a cowboy on one side and her eldest daughter on the other, carrying a tin box of documents, like she owned whatever room she was walking into. She had walked through looks like this her entire life. She walked through this one the same way, at pace, chin level, attending to the ground directly in front of her, and the courthouse door at the end of it. At one of the market stalls, a woman named Gertrude Marsh, who had bought eggs from Lily every Saturday for 4 years, and who had stood in that auction crowd and not bid, and had not since been easy about it, said, "Hannah," as she passed. Hannah stopped. "That judge is Aldrich Plum," Gertrude said quietly. "He and Price have played cards together every Friday for 2 years." She paused. "But his clerk, Yates, is honest. File with Yates. Get it time-stamped before Foute's man arrives." Hannah looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Gertrude. It is the least I can do," Gertrude said, with the emphasis of a woman who meant it precisely and completely. Yates the clerk was at his desk at 8:40 in the morning, and he was honest, and he time-stamped their response to the defect claim at 8:47, which was 1 hour and 13 minutes before Foute's man arrived to file the relisting notice. The judge reviewed the response the same afternoon. His ruling, delivered the following Tuesday in a courtroom that held 30 people and was full, was that the auction had been properly conducted, the bid properly registered, the sale valid, and the relisting notice denied. Cole Reardon was standing at the back of the courtroom. Hannah was at the front with her attorney, a young man named Briggs, who had taken the case for a fee they had negotiated down to something she could manage. When the judge read the ruling, she did not look at Briggs. She turned and found Cole at the back of the room, and he was already looking at her, and she held that for a moment. Price was there. He was a compact man with a gray beard and the expression of someone who had expected to win and was recalibrating. He looked at Hannah when the ruling was read with the look of a man who had decided she was going to be a problem and had filed that information away. As the courtroom emptied, he moved to pass her in the aisle. Cole Reardon stepped into the aisle ahead of him. He did not touch the man. He did not say anything threatening. He simply stood there at his full height between Price and Hannah, in the way of a man who has decided where he stands and has no plans to move. Price looked at him for a long moment, then looked at Hannah over his shoulder as he went past. The room was not empty yet. Briggs had seen it. Gertrude Marsh, who had come for the ruling, had seen it. The 10 or 12 remaining spectators had seen it. Lily, beside her mother, had seen it. She reached over and put her hand inside Hannah's arm, and Hannah felt the weight of it, her eldest, who had been holding herself apart for 5 weeks, deciding, and she covered Lily's hand with her own, and they walked out of the courthouse together into the cold December air. He asked her in January, after the ground had frozen hard, and the house had the particular warmth that a house gets in deep winter when the stove is kept going, and the bread is in the oven, and there are 7 people living in it who have arrived at an agreement about one another. He asked her in the kitchen on a Sunday morning when the daughters were at church with Lily in charge of them, which was the only interval of genuine quiet the house ever produced. He had one good reason, and he said it without decoration. The way he said everything that mattered. That he had spent 9 years being nowhere in particular, and that since October he had been somewhere, and that he would like to stay. She said yes before he had finished. She said it the way she did everything, directly, with both hands, taking up every inch of what she was agreeing to. They were married in February of 1887, on a Saturday, in the Hardin Creek Church where Edmund Birch had sat for years, and Pell the auctioneer, who had been invited because Hannah believed in a complete accounting, sat in the 3rd row and blew his nose loudly during the vows. All 6 daughters stood at the front. Bess held the flowers. Lily held herself together until the end, and then did not, and was not ashamed of it. The bread Hannah baked for the wedding supper was the same bread she baked every morning, the sourdough, from the same crock. The same culture she had kept since before any of her daughters were born. She had carried it through the flood year and the 2 dry summers and the 7 months of being a widow, and she put it on the table that evening, and cut it herself, and it was the same bread it had always been. Which was, in its way, the whole story. She had been auctioned like a piece of property on a Thursday morning in October, and she had stood on those steps and looked over the heads of the crowd at a fixed point above the livery stable and done her arithmetic. And what she had concluded was this: that she had worked 60 acres and raised 6 daughters and kept her books and her bread culture and herself intact through everything the world had sent, and that no bank and no procedure and no man with a careful suit and a manner of looking past people had changed any of that or could. She had stood there and let them do their procedure, and she was still standing. She would be standing long after the procedure was forgotten. That was always going to be the end of the story. Everything else was just the company she kept along the way.